Powered by Riverside FM.
Powered by Riverside.
Welcome to another edition of the UP. Hit that like and subscribe button. Keep the algorithm going and keep growing the channel. It is much appreciated. It's the morning after. The morning after the debacle at the Target Center. Minnesota Timberwolves lost, but a great season. You ever had that hard day at work? Been working all day, everything aggravated you at work, and then you come home, and then you kind of take it out on people that are at home. You come home a little crabby. I mean, you're not horrible, but you bring home work to your home. And, that's not a great practice to have. You got to have that time to decompress. And I believe that's happening a little bit with the Minnesota Timberwolves fans. Like, can we get off KG's back for not showing up at a playoff game? I mean, really? Is that what we're talking about on social media? A guy that gave us so many great years, the best Timberwolf ever thus far, and people are on his butt because he did not show up at a playoff game. I mean, it's all over social media. Come on, man. Come on. Did the Minnesota Timberwolves give him a reason to show up at home? Now, maybe he should have made an away game because that's where we won the majority of our games. This playoffs was on the road. Are you going to blame this man for watching the debacles that he saw at home, flying in for that? I wouldn't have come in for that. He sent out messages to Ant, Big Cat, Rudy Gobert on his podcast. He was cheering us on from afar. But give him a reason to come back home. Instead of criticizing him, how about, here's a thought, how about Minnesota Timberwolves organization, Minnesota Timberwolves players, Minnesota Timberwolves coaching staff, let's give him a reason to come back home. Because the Minnesota fans did their part in terms of making that environment crazy. We just didn't have a lot to cheer about. So Minnesota Timberwolves fans, and if there are people in the organization that are upset with Kevin Garnett for not showing up, and I haven't heard that, but I'm just saying, if there are people out there that are really upset that Kevin Garnett did not show up at a game, you got to get your mind on the right things. Like, that is the least important thing in the world right now for the Minnesota Timberwolves to be thinking about whether or not Kevin Garnett comes to a game. Now, here's the big setup, because you know what's going to happen. And this is what's going to run rampant on social media. I believe probably Kevin Garnett was waiting on the Minnesota Timberwolves to play the Celtics in the championship. And I think he was going to show up for both teams. Now, the Celtics are in the championship. Boy, if he makes an appearance in Boston at that game, you think there's venom now towards KG for not showing up at a Minnesota Timberwolves home game. You think there's venom now? There's definitely going to be venom if he shows up at a Boston Celtics team. And I can't hate on him for that. Hell, he won a championship there. He toiled at many things here with the Minnesota Timberwolves. He grinded that thing out, tried to win championships here. They could never really build a legit team around him that could sustain anything. Get shipped to Boston. create a big three with Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, won a championship. Rondo won a championship. That's where he won his championship. That's where he had his greatest seasons. It may hurt Minnesota Timberwolves fans because I'm a big Minnesota Timberwolves fan. It may hurt, but that's where he had his best years. So I wouldn't be surprised if he shows up. Question for the day is, and I got this from an emailer, thought it was a good subject to talk about it. Who's going to win championship first in Minnesota? Will it be the Minnesota Vikings or the Minnesota Timberwolves? Like, I thought that was something to really ponder. I don't know if ponder is a good word here in Minnesota, but this is something that's interesting to think about. Who's going to win? Both teams are set up really well by their organizations. Both teams have budding superstars. Justin Jefferson is a superstar. Anthony Edwards is getting there. There's a lot of excitement around both teams. So who gets to the finish line first? See, I think this year with the Minnesota Timberwolves, it's all about personnel moves. Where do they go from here? And man, I get this feeling, and I was trying to touch on this all playoffs long because I heard the comments from Ant, and I heard it again at his press conference last night talking about we'll be back. It's that young mind that we'll be back. Like, it's okay to have that confidence. First thing he'll say is, well, what am I supposed to say? We're not going to be back? No, but you don't have to say anything about being back at all. Because now you put yourself out there. And I touched on this in various pods. I just get the feeling that this was a one-time deal for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Like, the stars were aligned. The sun is where it's supposed to be. Like, everything was aligned this year to make something special happen, and they missed out on their opportunity. That happens in sports all the time. I just get the feeling that this is a one-year deal because here's the deal. It's not really about what you do. You've got to keep pace with teams that you're competing against. You think the Lakers are going to come back with the same team? You barely got through Denver. You think they're going to stay pat and be who they were this year? You think they're not going to make any additions? You think that the Denver Nuggets is not a destination for some really, really good free agents? You think they're going to sit still? OKC, who was the number one seed, you think they're not going to mature and be better next year? You just had trouble with the Dallas Mavericks. No matter what happens in the next series, you think they're not a destination? We haven't even talked about teams that weren't even around, like the Clippers. You think they're not going to rejuggle some things there? The Pelicans? You think they're not going to rejuggle some things there? The Golden State Warriors? You think they're not going to rejuggle some things there? See, I don't think this is as easy as it sounds. I don't think, oh, well, we're going to get back. Dude, I don't think that there's some things that have to happen because the Dallas Mavericks just gave the league a blueprint to beating you, to slowing down Anthony Edwards because he can obviously be slowed down. How to slow down Big Cat. And now the book is going to be out on Rudy Gobert. So I don't think this thing is as easy as we'll be back. I don't know. Remember back in the day when the Minnesota Vikings had Brett Favre, and Brett Favre came in and had that really, really incredible season, and then semi-retired again, and everybody was flying down to Hattiesburg, Mississippi to get him to come back for a second season because his first season with the Vikings was absolutely fantastic. What happened the second season? Wasn't the same Brett Favre. The stars were not aligned like they were the first season he was with the Minnesota Vikings. So this stuff, man, is not It's not guaranteed. And the Minnesota Timberwolves, they've got some crucial decisions to make. Talk about the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings are in good shape, man. They got their franchise quarterback. They got a great nucleus in place. B-Flow is building a defense. Now, where they're going to rank, I have no idea. When I looked at the stats and saw that they were ranked 28th in the league last year, it didn't feel like they were ranked 28th. Like, again, you can throw numbers out there all day long. As I mentioned to you before, Rudy Gobert has great numbers, but what is he really? What is the Minnesota Vikings defense really? Like, B-Flow came in, and even though it's not a huge jump from what they were before he got there, I mean, they were arguably the worst defense in the league. Losing the playoff game to the Giants. Jones throwing for 400 yards. I mean, that's what that defense gave up. And no matter what the stats say, that defense looked different last year. And now B-Flow is starting to get some pieces together. You got a young, mature quarterback who, for all intents and purposes, what I'm hearing, he's fighting in practice, in OTAs. People love this kid. They say he's got to work on his footwork, but they're saying that he's going to make that quarterback competition interesting. And I believe it. J.J. McCarthy's going to make that quarterback competition interesting. So now you got that in place. Defense, offense, you know, I'm not worried about the whole Justin Jefferson thing. He's going to be in place for a long period of time to go with J.J. McCarthy. Like, the Vikings are in a good spot. And here's the deal. You're not going to see it next year. I honestly believe that we are a non-playoff team next year. But the year after, over $100 million in salary cap space. Oh, the team that you can build. Oh, I'm just waiting for the offseason next year. I may do 5 pods a day just on free agency. Just on free agency next year. They are set up to build a really, really good team. But again, like the Minnesota Timberwolves, it's all about personnel decisions and what other teams are doing that you compete against. What are the Packers doing? What are the Chicago Bears doing? What are the Detroit Lions doing? Teams that arguably are better than you. How do you get to be better than them? You've got to be realistic with your team and build your team to be better than the people that you participate against and compete against. Here's a crazy thing about the Minnesota Vikings and the Minnesota Timberwolves. Minnesota Vikings have a stable front office from owner on down to the GM, Quasi. Minnesota Vikings are very stable. Minnesota Timberwolves, on the other hand, who's going to be the owner? That's going to determine a lot. Everybody has a different philosophy on how to run the team. Some people are really aggressive, like a Mark Cuban, always been really, really aggressive for the Dallas Mavericks. Who's going to be the owner of the Timberwolves? A-Rod and his crew? Or Glenn Taylor and his crew? That's going to make a huge difference going forward when you're talking about who's going to get to a championship first. We don't even know who our owner is going to be. It's crazy, man. It's crazy. Minnesota Vikings have way more stability in their front office. We know who our owners are. We know who our capologist is. We know who our GM is. We know who our head coach is. And our superstar has arrived. He's not coming like Ann Edwards. Justin Jefferson has arrived. So that's all interesting stuff. Minnesota Timberwolves, Tim Connelly, who's done a fantastic job at GM, there was rumors that he was going to Detroit. My question was Detroit really actively pursuing him hard? Or did Tim Connelly have an itch to leave? Like, we got him from the Denver Nuggets. He built the Denver Nuggets. Comes to the Minnesota Timberwolves, then he built the team that put out the defending champs, the Denver Nuggets. So Tim Connelly is a hot commodity. Everywhere he goes, everything he touches turns to gold. when it comes to personnel decisions. You need to pay that guy what he wants, if he's underpaid at all. Because this is a fork in the road for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Which way do we go? Do we keep Cat? Do we trade Cat? Do we keep Rudy Gobert, or do we trade Rudy Gobert? You need a guy in place that knows what the heck he's doing. And that's Tim Connelly. That's huge. That's huge. Star players, I think the Minnesota Timberwolves arguably have really one star, and that's Anthony Edwards. And we've got multiple stars on the Minnesota Vikings, but we have yet to identify that franchise quarterback. Could be J.J. McCarthy. Could be Sam Darnold. Could be somebody that's not even on the team. But those guys are going to have their opportunities to battle for that in OTAs, in mini camp, and in practice, and throughout the year. Once we get that quarterback in place, that's going to tell me a whole lot. I just circle back to the cap space for the Minnesota Vikings. Like, that's a huge deal. It gives you a lot of, as Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah would say, flexibility to do a lot of things. So it's going to be interesting. You know, if you put a gun to my head right now and ask me who's going to win the championship first, I would say it's going to be the Minnesota Vikings. I just got a feeling that the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to take a step back. And I think this season was an outlier. Not that they're going to be bad. Not that they're going to be bad. I just don't think that they're one of the elite teams in the league. And I know they made the Final Four. Could have made the championship. I think what we saw was right place, right time. All the stars aligned season. And once they got into the playoffs, they were exposed. Whether they won the series or lost the series, they were exposed. A lot of coaches, a lot of people around the league are going to see, okay, this is what the Timberwolves are. The Dallas Mavericks gave them a blueprint. And I just think, unless there are some personnel changes, I think you get a little bit less of the result that you got this year. That's just my feeling. I think just this may be an outlier. I'm not saying they're not going to be good. I think they'll be a playoff team next year. I just don't think you're going to get the number one seed. I don't think they're going to be in that conversation because, you know, teams are going to move. So I just don't think they're going to be in that conversation. Teams are going to move, man. Teams are not going to stay pat. Teams are going to be looking to get better. And as you know, there are more teams out there that are aggressive than not aggressive because they want to win that chip. So interesting thoughts. Who's going to win the championship first? Vikings, Timberwolves. If I was a betting man, I would go with the Minnesota Vikings. I think they're a little bit more stable. I think they got something with one of these two quarterbacks. They got a foundation that's already in place, better front office. Their superstar has arrived. B-Flow, to me, one of the best assistant coaches in the league, in the defense that he's building. How can you not pick the Minnesota Vikings? I don't think either team will do too much next year, Timberwolves or the Vikings. Like I said, I think the Timberwolves will be a playoff team. Minnesota Vikings will not. But the year after next season for the Minnesota Vikings is really going to be interesting. They're getting set up to make a run. And Kwesi and KLC are doing a pretty good job. They just got to get the quarterback stuff figured out. This has been Unconventional Playbook. Thank you for the growth of this channel. Almost in less than a month, guys, almost 4,000 subscribers, man. Lots of good feedback from people sending me emails on topics and stating their opinions and putting things in the comments. Like, I really, really appreciate it. We're going to keep rolling with this thing. This has been Unconventional Playbook on a gloomy Friday here in Wisconsin. Hopefully things will brighten up over the weekend. I will see you when I see you.
Powered by Riverside.